Texas State Network News with Porter Randall, direct from the TSN newsroom. We'll have the latest local, state, national, and international news in 1 minute.
Dr. Richard Halden, the medical director of Fort Worth's Carter Blood Center.
During the past months, we of the Carter Blood Center have come to revere Porter Randall as a friend and compatriot, an articulate, courageous patient and man, one who in the throes of chronic illness facing death had the fortitude and endurance to manifest his love of natural beauty and primitive society. As a world traveler and observer, he often revealed his excitement about returning to Africa, and the medallions which he wore were evidence of such devotion. With his death, in our opinion, the universe has lost an individualist, one who not only was respected and loved by the high and the low, but one capable of molding their opinions free of the flare of overstatement and sensationalism. Fitting to his memory, I request from his admirers in his name one individual sacrifice for community benefit wheresoever they may be. In my heart, I know that Porter shall hear and approve. God bless him.
The Porter Randall family has asked that expressions of sympathy be in the form of contributions to the Carter Blood Center, 1263 West Rosedale Street, Fort Worth, Texas.
This is Texas State Network President Stan Wilson. This newscast has for 30 years been presented by Porter Randall. Today, his voice is silent. He is dead at the age of 56. We of the Texas State Network feel it appropriate that there be one more Porter Randall broadcast, a tribute to Texas' best-known radio journalist. Listen now to excerpts from Porter Randall's broadcasts that span more than a quarter of a century.
Porter Randall always looked for the human side to every news story. It's something that was started in the very beginning of his news career. Shortly after graduating from the University of Missouri School of Journalism, Randall got his first job in radio. He went to work for station WIBW in Topeka, Kansas. The year was 1938.
And now to the news and Porter Randall.
A little Italian farmer was working in his fields near Auburn, Nebraska this afternoon. Not far away from where he worked lay the Missouri Pacific Railroad tracks. Several times during the past few days, the little Italian had noticed 3 men loitering around those tracks. They were there again this afternoon, and this time something, he knew not what, made him watch them more carefully. He saw them run up to the track, fumble with something between the railroad ties, then hurry away. In the distance, he heard the fast Omaha-bound passenger train roaring down those same tracks. He knew he had to flag down the engineer in that train cab. The engineer saw him standing by the tracks, waving his arms frantically. The great Omaha flyer screeched to a halt. What's the meaning of this? The engineer wanted to know. Well, the little Italian had no meaning to give, nothing except that 3 men who had been standing beside the tracks a few minutes before had looked suspicious to him. And just where were these 3 men standing, the engineer asked. Only a few yards ahead, said the little Italian, right here, and he took a few steps forward. The rest of the crew came up, and at their feet, they found fuse caps on the rail. Fuse caps, which had the train stopped 60 seconds later, would have set off 25 sticks of dynamite. Enough dynamite, say railroad officials tonight, to have blown the entire engine and cars into 1,000,000 bits. And the little Italian, what of him? His name is Gabini, he says. Angelo Gabini knows not yet tonight why those 3 men looked suspicious to him, or what intuition it was that brought him to stop that fast Omaha-bound passenger train.
In 1941, Randall joined the flagship station of the Texas State Network, radio station KFJZ in Fort Worth. For many Texans, Porter Randall was the alarm clock, as much a part of morning as breakfast and coffee. His newscasts were heard at 7:30 and noon on the more than 130 stations of the Texas State Network. They were heard at 6:30, 7:30, 8 o'clock, and noon on KFJZ in Fort Worth. During the Second World War, Randall served in the Coast Guard. Still, he was on the radio.
2 years ago, on November 23rd, was organized the Coast Guard Women's Reserve. And this is a transcribed program in tribute to those sailors in skirts, the Coast Guard spars. First, Tony Corrado and the CG Quintet pay musical compliment to the spars with Sweet and Lovely.
As World War II raged, Texans turned for their news to Porter Randall. These stories, taken from a number of newscasts, span those harsh war years.
Berlin is blazing with fires following a new raid by the Royal Air Force today. The British bombed Hamburg, Bremen, and other German cities, as well as Berlin. Berlin reports 14 civilians have been killed, 41 injured in today's dawn attack. The House of Commons today heard a speech from Prime Minister Churchill, a speech in which the Prime Minister promised that he was bearing the facts and summing up the situation in the light of recent developments. Mr. Churchill's speech left members of the House feeling rosy in their optimism. On the other hand, certain pessimists are able to point to certain passages in the speech in which Churchill warned that the horizon of the future is still studded with dark and foreboding clouds. First the bitter and then the sweet. The Prime Minister declared that Britain must not relax the watch against a German invasion. Not only an invasion of the island home, but also an invasion of the Suez Canal.
My telephone rang, and I was informed by the studio that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. Well, of course, I made a mad dash down to the studio to get here as fast as I could, and then I was on the air for 33 hours following that without a single break, bringing the news of the attack and the subsequent developments to our listeners of the network. I do recall that following that 33 hours, during which I had no chance to shave, no chance to clean up at all, I was interested in seeing what the reaction was among the people. And I know I went downtown and I stood on the corner of the Blackstone Hotel on 7th Street to watch the people and see how they were taking the news that we had been broadcasting, the news of this horrible thing that had happened. And as I stood there for some 15 or 20 minutes, I noticed a car had been circling the block several times. It circled about 3 times. Finally, it stopped. 2 men came out, motioned for me to come over. They said, "What's your name?" I didn't like their attitude, and I said, "Well, who are you?" And they said, "Never mind that, what's your name?" And I refused to give them my name until they flashed their identification papers. They were FBI agents. They said that they had been instructed within a matter of hours after Pearl Harbor to pick up any suspicious-looking characters they saw on the streets. Well, I looked pretty suspicious, I guess, because, as I say, I'd not shaved in a couple of days that I'd been on the air. I looked pretty ragged. I certainly must have looked like a vagrant. And unfortunately, I had no identification on me whatsoever. I told them my name. They said, no, we know Porter Randall. He's an old man. I said, "You're not an old man." They said, "You'll have to come with us." They took me to the police station. I was still unable to identify myself, but there, of course, I was permitted to make a telephone call, and I called the station manager and asked him to come down and identify me. I was actually put behind bars for a couple of hours. The station manager came down. He took one look at me. He had been told what the story was. He looked at me. They said, "Can you identify him?" He said, "I've never seen him before in my life."
General MacArthur today announced the Permanent Occupation Army for the conquered territory. Japan, he says, is going to be patrolled by the 11th Airborne, the 1st Cavalry, the 24th and the 25th Infantry Divisions. The 6th and the 7th Infantry Divisions are going to remain in Korea. Tomorrow is the 1st anniversary of VJ Day. Just a year ago that Japan surrendered. The American people tomorrow will celebrate the anniversary with prayers and commemoration for those who died to make it possible. It will not, however, be a legal holiday. In Tokyo, there's going to be nothing tomorrow but a small parade past the Imperial Palace.
The war was over. The troops were coming home. Somehow, Porter Randall managed to keep up with the arrivals of the troop ships and obtain the names of Texans on them. Anxious relatives across the state listened for the names of their boys overseas. your name might be listed here.
Here's a rather lengthy passenger list from the Marine Swallow, due to land in Seattle, Washington, tomorrow or Monday. From Ennis, Technician Archie S. Ray and Private First Class Charlie M. Sturley. From Greenville, Staff Sergeant Marvin R. Compton, PFC Jack Hale. From Waxahachie, Technical Sergeant James E. Wiley. From Grand Prairie, Sergeant Leland.
Randall, like most newsmen, worked while other people were enjoying holidays. He worked on New Year's Eve, 1949.
Did you ever wonder where time goes? What happens to the old years when their lifespan is done? Well, after hearing the allegorical sketch that follows, you will hereafter know the answer to those mysteries. Dave Naugle will play the part of the departing year of 1949, and with your permission, I'll attempt to step into the role of Father Time. Oh, there goes our signal, 1949. Your time is up. And look, there's my New Year starting out. There he goes, 1950.
Happy New Year, Father Time.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year, everybody.
In 1949, at the invitation of the Air Force Secretary, Porter Randall toured Europe and covered every air base in Europe, Africa, and the British Isles, interviewing Texas servicemen and broadcasting messages home to their families.
So let's see who we get on this first stop in Berlin at Tempelhof Aerodrome. Here's Porter Randall.
Thank you, Hal Thompson. I'd like to talk to Staff Sergeant J.R. Goodman. Sergeant, I understand from my notes here, you come from Big Spring, Texas.
That's right, sir.
We've got a radio station out there. You probably listen to it, too.
Yes, sir. I've heard your newscast a lot of mornings.
Oh, you have, really?
Yes, sir.
Well, you know, Sergeant, when we get back with these interviews, here's what's going to happen. We're going out and write your folks a letter. They'll thus find out what time this is going to be on the air, and so they're going to have a chance to hear you speaking from Tempelhof Air Base here in Berlin, Germany.
While he was in Europe, Randall flew reporter missions during the Berlin airlift.
It was June 21st that Hal Thompson and I took off in a C-54 transport plane from Wiesbaden, Germany, the Y-80 base at Wiesbaden, flying to Berlin via the Operation Vittles. The flight took us 1 hour and 40 minutes. The air corridor, the southern corridor which we flew, is 20 miles wide, and nearly all of that distance is over Russian territory. That is the entire distance from Wiesbaden to Berlin. Arriving in Berlin, Hal and I went for a jeep ride through the streets of Berlin. We mention it on the recording, cobblestone streets that have not been repaired or paved since before the war, and you perhaps can imagine what it was like riding in the back of a jeep with no springs over these rough cobblestone streets for some 4 or 5 hours. But the big feature of this broadcast is flying the airlift to Berlin. And so now I'd like to invite you to step into the cabin of a C-54 at the Tempelhof Aerodrome field in Berlin, just as we did, and we take off now in a C-54 from Berlin to Wiesbaden, Germany, via Operation Vittles, the Berlin airlift. We took off from Wiesbaden yesterday at 12:34 noon, flying the southern corridor. We rendezvoused over the Fulda Beacon, and at that point we hit our 3-minute interval schedule, flew into Berlin down the southern corridor, which is about 20 miles wide.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Porter Randall speaking from Wiesbaden, Germany, on the banks of the Rhine River. The traveling microphone of KFJZ and the Texas State Network has been set up on the dance floor to bring you the quarter hour of music by the German orchestra. Foreign correspondents, public information men, and the boys who fly the Berlin airlift together at this rendezvous, which has the enviable reputation, one of the best press centers in the European theater. Now from Wiesbaden, Germany, KFJZ and the Texas State Network takes pleasure in presenting the music of the Press Center German Orchestra with vocals by Helga Neri. We'd like to express our thanks to the military services and to Staff Sergeant Phil Frankovich for making this broadcast possible. The broadcast was produced by Hal Thompson, originated from Germany through KFJZ's traveling microphone. This is Porter Randall speaking. This is TSN, the Texas State Network.
A dance band program from Germany seems a little out of the ordinary, but not for Porter Randall. Texans often heard his voice reporting from the far corners of the earth. Every year he directed tours through Africa, Asia, Europe, the Holy Lands, the Orient, the South Seas, and around the world. He organized and conducted one of the first goodwill tours of Russia. In all of his traveling, Porter Randall found a place on earth that he likes better than any other. In his office today, there are brochures on a Porter Randall African Spectacular Tour. It was scheduled to depart on January 25th, 1972. In it, Porter Randall wrote of Africa, "Each time I go there, my pulse pounds with the old excitement again. I renew a secret pledge that I made years ago. Someday, Africa will be my home."
Africa is filthy, fierce, and freezing. Africa is ugly. Africa is steaming, scorching, and Africa is lovely as her fragile flowers. Africa can be exasperating, terrifying, enticing, and exciting, mysterious and violent. She is canopied by a velvet technicolored sky that sometimes hangs so low you can almost reach up and pluck a star to make a necklace for your love. The sun sets like a great bonfire behind the pile of purple peaks, and this is Africa's finest hour. Surely when God created this continent of contrasts, even he must have stood back and stared in awe.
When he returned from his many tours, Porter Randall shared his adventures with Texans through hundreds of speaking engagements each year.
Purely personal, I speak tomorrow night in Colorado City, 7:30 p.m. in the auditorium of the Colorado City High School. I speak on why we are fighting in Vietnam. The film that follows the chromatic confusion in Southeast Asia, I made in Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, and Bangkok. 7:30 tomorrow night in the high school auditorium at Colorado City.
Porter Randall believed in giving Texans a little humor in the mornings to brighten their day. Millions have chuckled at stories such as this one.
Linda Henderson of Dallas waded into the surf yesterday wearing a white bathing suit that she said was made of paper. A crowd gathered to see the paper bathing suit would last, but they never found out. She waded back out when the water was only up to her knees. She lost her nerve, but then so would you.
Porter Randall reported humor, but he also reported Texas tragedies.
Until exactly 12 minutes after 9 this morning, Texas City was a busy little seaport and industrial town. It is located, or was located, on the Gulf of Mexico, just 10 miles across the bay from Galveston. Its population about 15,000. Most of them worked in the big chemical and petroleum plants, or worked on the docks loading the ships. Tied up to one of the docks this morning was a French ship, the Grand Camp. She was taking on a cargo. Some say it was ammunition, others claim it was nitrate fertilizer. We will never know. There is no one alive tonight who was aboard at the time it happened. and the explosion has scattered the wreckage of the vessel over a distance of 4 miles.
In 1967, Hurricane Beulah struck the Texas coast. She was called the billion-dollar blow.
I just came back from another cruise through downtown Corpus Christi, during which I got hit by a shower of broken glass. Luckily, I was in a car. Out on the street right now, there are bits of glass blowing about like 10,000 vicious little daggers. The sidewalks in the downtown city are now splattered with broken glass. There are reports that some power lines have gone down now, but I didn't see any. I did see theater marquees caved in like they had been hammered with a huge axe. Once on the beachfront, just moments ago, I stopped the car to write down some notes. And in the blast of that vicious wind, I swear the car beneath me started to do a Roomba. Celia will go into the record books as one of the worst hurricanes ever in the history of South Texas. For some areas, even worse than Beulah, that big blow of 3 years ago. For Corpus Christi, this one was much worse. 90% of the buildings in downtown Corpus Christi have either been destroyed or have suffered major damage. And our reporters touring the residential areas of Corpus on this morning after the night before report that at least 70% of the homes have been totally destroyed or have received major damage. 70%. Porter Randall's life was filled with vitality and activity. He was a mystifying, human, free-spirited, and infinitely interesting person. Listeners felt the warmth of his personality even though they couldn't see his gentle nature in the studio. Sometimes at 7:30 on cold Saturday mornings, he could be seen reading his news while his old stray dog slept with her head on his feet. From the sound of his voice, we can tell that this recording was made many years ago. His warm personality is depicted as he persuades his mother, who was on a visit from out of state, to allow him to record her voice.
Presenting Mrs. Charles Randall and the latest...
The Mexican Senate has given its thunderous approval to the
Mrs.
declaration
Randall, we
of
have
war
a late bulletin here, and we
imprisonment.
haven't much time. Would you please... Here, read, would you?
Oh, that's just fun. Okay, Ledbetter.
See, I stuttered on.
Oh, it was wonderful.
Oh, wonderful.
Okay, come on, Inky. Come on. Mice, Inky. Mice. Here, go get him. 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 Go on, go get him. Read this here, Mother.
Why? He won't go over there, will he?
No, sure, I'll go over there. Go on, read this. Right here into the microphone, you know.
Look at that. Now?
Yeah, now, yes.
Making other people happy is an admirable trait. Making oneself happy is a pleasant experience. Let's do be gay and as lighthearted as we can.
We got some more time. Okay.
Did you ever wonder where time goes?
This is Porter Randall reporting. This is TSN, the Texas State Network.